think also from the point of view of regulation, and not just in terms of formal regulation, but also in proper terms like the way that we have here. Most of the content that we see on television or even in case of newspapers, where I think the mainstream media is concerned, it's mostly controlled by the upper class, the elite class. But then when we look at the parallel model, as Sonia was talking about, it's something that is more inclusive. We see a lot of, it's not really regulated in that sense, not in the formal sense. There might be other forms of regulation, as in maybe self-censorship in certain terms and maybe some forms of informal controls. But I think from the regulatory perspective, the new model, the model of the internet, the parallel model seems to be more inclusive and more open. So, in that perspective.
Even this point was also reflected in Philip Howard's article, when he was talking about Arab Spring or authoritarian regimes, of how they were challenged through new media or because of the post-broadcast model. So it is possible to control or regulate, but regulate the internet, but at the same time they have failed. It's not easy. So now what they are doing is hiring professional public relations, political public relations, and hiring deploying political bots to crowd out any kind of activist voices or any kind of opposition voices from the internet. So I think that is again quite a worrisome development that is happening in the post-broadcast era. So on the one hand we have a lot of positives, but on the other hand also we have to look at what are the challenges that is happening.
So I was thinking the question of broadcast models is important in public because it tells about how the consumer and spectator integrated into the model. So the new 2.0 technology transfers power to a user in a way that didn't with radio and television, which was the previous model. And that's a huge feature because there's no signing to for and you can find without. So that creates a kind of a rather a huge potential culture, and because it's user driven and largely decentralized, it means that it's very difficult to control. The ownership remains private. And because there's a premium, another characteristic of broadcast is that because there is a premium on participation, everyone can be a broadcaster. Now, certainly, that is a very important part of the Internet Web 2.0 culture, that it is a kind of huge ongoing project that spans the world, decentralized, and difficult for any one corporation or one state to control. Because even on the surveillance, the state is surveilling citizens, but citizens and users are also putting the under enormous pressure to make it more accountable and transparent because of features like Snowden and others and WikiLeaks. See that the security of the law, people feel that so, what is the final, perhaps, out of this new model of global participatory model, is that there can be a bounce when people go online. Not always, but it speaks links up with commitment and action, it makes the internet a primary vehicle for mobilization. So one of the elusive qualities that is in Walter Lippmann's book, Defense in Public, was very famous for it, because it basically said people didn't have the information, people didn't have the attention span to follow the national events. So they sort of turned the responsibility over to epistemic communities of experts who would speak on behalf of the public. So of course this is a very big issue because it is a sharply elitist model with the assumption that people prefer only to be involved in families and friends and the whole area of politics and larger issues really does not get buy-in from the ordinary public and on the public. So this broadcast model, I would say that these different characteristics have changed dramatically the system of communication between the passive system model of communication and the active. So that, in part, is an important part of the level of why the new broadcast model is quite chaotic, quite undisciplined, right, decentralized, and allows people to use in a variety of ways that not the centers of the internet could have predicted. Perhaps the final attribute to think about is that Tim Berners-Lee, who is given credit for inventing the internet, along with others, he insisted that the internet remain in the public and not be owned by any individual. So this openness is structurally part of its characteristic. Right? So it is not a property to be owned to exclude others, and because it is not copyrighted, it remains in the public domain. So that gives it a highly public quality, no matter how it will be used or viewed by individuals. It's a very different system than NBC television or ABC News or initially Air Inc. had its own, which was the national broadcaster. So thinking about the model helps us understand the uniqueness of this system, that power has been moved from the power elites to a much different, to users, to me a very dramatic relationship. So that's what I think the broadcast model is important, because it means, among other things, that many people who have never access to any communication other than a newspaper or a state or private broadcaster now have alternative sources. So that's as you think about a broadcaster, it helps us say, well, what are these two properties? And who really, can anyone control it? Where is its dynamism, right? And that you see that, I think, it is certainly at least 50% a user-driven system. So that's the idea of a broadcast model.
I have, I guess, questions about that. I think what you're saying is true about there's all this potential that it's sort of more public by nature, but as I guess as it's been normalized and some of the uses of the internet have been formalized in different ways, we're seeing like limitations to how that plays out. So, I mean, it has empowered things like WikiLeaks to spread things, but even then they partnered with larger like newspapers and publications to get the word out because they knew those people already had the audience. But I think we're also seeing sort of a limitation in how it's used by the public. The big watchword for how interactive the internet is how you can share information, that you can just move these topics around. But I think what we're seeing is that shareability lends like a shallowness to exchange, where it becomes like an echo chamber, because people won't watch a video that's longer than like 15 or 30 seconds, so you get something that people kind of have a gut like rah reaction to, instead of something that has more depth. And then one of the students over at Jamia was talking about feedback mechanisms, which is like this amazing way that like the public can talk back, but we're also having to limit them. So the CBC closed the comment section on any of its articles about Indigenous people in Canada because the comments were so like racist and problematic that it was like detrimental to public discussion. So I think at the same time there's public access like a limit, or that's the right word. We're seeing sort of this thing where it's difficult to get like a more in-depth reaction from the majority of users. So you get sort of these pockets that come up with like a couple influential people who are talking about something more in depth, but the actual general public doesn't have time to engage at that level, maybe.
So, right? So we have to sort of look at all the intricacies of the broadcast model. So when you're speaking, there's a tendency all of us to say, well, it's not in depth, public doesn't have time. That's a multiple times. So actually, since the last 20 years, the dramatic expansion of the broadcast model has meant that it just increases its complexity and usage, but it keeps growing and bringing more people in, particularly people at the bottom of the scale in the global south. The use of the mobile, the mobile, of course, it's very different. You can have in one village, one phone, you can take right? You can use the phone becomes indispensable for finding out information about market conditions, sales, for women's issues outside of the home. So we have to think of it in a very broad sense. Here's the question. The broadcast model is interesting because it gives you a very easy buy-in. You go to people like that, you go participate in a conversation, you can make contact, but you can also exit. So it doesn't require a deep commitment. So that means you can drop in, drop out. So that is very different, right? The idea that you have one television news program, one comedy news program, one history news program, that's gone. People are no longer have to be kind of loyal watchers of the single program. So this is what, so it's the complexity, the multi-level ways in which it's used. Do you think you're an expert because of the internet? Okay. So then it's a facilitator. The model is a facilitator to linking up with people, making talk and walk more closely in which that. So to try to specify the fact that when you ask the few ask in its big surveys, how do you use the internet? What are the three things that who do people, what are they doing with their own internet? Okay. So the interesting thing is about the new model, you have to say, empirically, as people interested in this phenomenon, they, in a few findings, that people use it to talk to their family first, talk to their friends second, and health third. So we need better answers to what people are doing online. How do social movement actors who are part of NGOs, social media activism, how do they use it compared to other people? It might be, but when you're involved, people, this theory is that of sabotage. People think that you for a common purpose. Of course, this is very much like Habermas' notion of what the public is. The public is created by strangers coming together for a common cause. So when you think about the public, it's very strange. It isn't like you're talking with your family, your uncles and your aunts inside the house, inside the private space, and you have said relationships. But when you the anti-Pakistan demonstrations in India, so you go there, you don't know who the but you are angry that something's not right. So you're demonstrating against the duties of demonstrators. I imagine there must be a lot of activity on this front in New Delhi. So you act with people who you're not related to. Secondly, you have to have an issue that links you to that system. And thirdly, you have to have a sliding scale of commitment. Even though one says, well, it's just superficial, but it makes it significant. So it's action with a purpose as against action just without interest. Kinds of logics of collective action, a given logic of collective action.
Yeah, I think the question that comes up to me, and I've sent you this in my diary entries, is like when people go in looking for an action, they'll find it, but there's sort of this broader question of literacy, of sort of a shared interest, and my sense, like from the readings, from my sense is that the internet works more to fragment that conversation in ways that are sometimes really positive, empower certain people into communities, but sometimes make it like separate the public into like a bunch of little spherical, is what one of the articles called it, which I'm not in love with as a term, but so I guess the reason that I always come up with doubts on this is I'm not sure who everyone's talking to on the internet. Like the hope that everyone's talking to strangers is nice, but I'm not confident that that's the case.
Remember the idea of strangers. I'm saying anyone, because on Facebook and other social media, you have to be part of the conversation. So you always have person. So frequently, it's quite unique when you go on Facebook. How many of you are on Facebook? Not Facebook, yes. Or its equivalent. How many on Twitter? Okay. So, of course, when you go on Facebook, they're always asking you to link to other links or always so they just say, well, I know you, and but that person knows 10 other people. They want to know you. Well, of course, if you have a common person, you have a person you share in common. So it's a very strong notion that you don't really know very well, or not necessarily who the others in the affinity circle are. So what I'm saying that before media is always what is the or how does it communicate? Right. The bear, you can,
I think another some of your conversation was not audible clearly. I don't know, there is some issue with the network today, but just to make some points here. One of the important points that also you raised is why some of the movements, some of political parties, some of the leaders, they get more traction as compared to other in the post-broadcast era. You know, almost all social movement, almost all political leaders and political parties are using internet and the latest technology. You know, so it's more of so we are moving from broadcast to narrowcast. So why some movements get traction but not others? So that is the central question to think about, and that's where I think we have to still allude to the idea of the system, allude to the idea of how we still we have traditional media is still very important, and how sometimes it is also you have to complement your media activism with your grassroots activism, and you have to make intervention at multiple sites, and that is most important. But again, it's very difficult to answer which movement will get traction and which movement would not get tractions in post broadcast era. But so I think I would also like to get some more answer from our students.
I would like to make a point here, just adding to what sir just said. When we talk about social movements, we need to keep in mind what their end goals are and from where they originate. So even within a cluster of social movements and causes that they are working towards, there are some actors, some social activists, or some civil society organizations which might have a higher or a dominant position compared to the others, or whose cause or whose end goal might strike a greater chord among the audience, or something that people would relate to faster than what the others are trying to propagate or trying to send across. And also, most of these social media, most of these social movement actors use social media as a platform in order to get across to traditional media. So if something that I'm trying to, if I'm using social media to forward my cause or my idea, maybe I'm doing it in order to gain visibility or gain precedence from the traditional media sources. So that is one of the motives sometimes.
So again, so one of the concern that has emerged from here and also raised from some of the scholars from the developing countries is how traditional media still play a very important role. So whenever there is a movement, something is going on. So even if you are orchestrating your movement through new media, what happens is you try to influence traditional media. And that's where you get more traction, that's where you get more attention and more audience, and that's where So still you depend upon traditional media for legitimacy. So I'm not so sure if this is also the case in case of developed countries, including Canada and the US, where if not newspaper, television becomes very important to secure legitimacy. So I think that kind of interactions we have to look at when talking about post-broadcast era and how different actors have been using some of these technology to pursue their goal.
One point I would refer, like the Kabir has mentioned. So in Indian psych, there is a typical kind of mentality that whatever is published in press, that the press medium, that is true. And if you compare that sort of a news that is emanating from social media, so there is a huge kind of a suspicion that comes from the readers and the users that it might be true or it may be true. So there is a kind of a distrust, because if you see some of the pattern of news gathering and news making, which the traditional medium have, they have a standardized format, they have a cross-check kind of a mechanism, which we hardly find in the social media. So there is that kind of a lacuna, which at some level in general psych of Indians, they rely more on to the authenticity of the press rather than on the social media.
Yeah, so similar kind of similar points. So whether so we would like to know what's the, how things are happening in case of developed countries, including Canada. How are the traditional media plays? So even Fletcher article talks about how newspapers have played a very important, or continue to play a very important role in creating public sphere.
So in Canada, in the last election, so in an election, the older like radio and television are by far more influential on in election time for political candidates. But at the same time, one of the big debates in Canada was this fight by the Prime Minister against this Muslim woman who wanted to wear the hijab during the citizenship ceremony. Anyway, there was quite a fight on this, and traditionally you would have said the government would have won using radio and television and the courts to force this woman to remove her hijab, to swear an oath to the queen. Yes, we're still on that. So, of course, what is different in this example is that it was not a passive person who was going to accept that the government would remove her constitutional rights to be able to wear practice her religion, which entailed a head covering. So the point is that the social media, she was very, a very good lawyer, really for this. She fought back in public. Now, it's true that some of it was in the mainstream, but a lot of it mobilizing the opinion came through the social media. So we can see there's a symbiotic relationship between open media, but the fact that media's primary quality is that it evolves out downwards to the use rather than simply increasing the power of the owners of radio and television. I think represents some kind of threshold, theoretical and structural threshold in the solution of information. So, and that the pluralism that is built into this broadcast model is very simple. You know, it's very simple at the cost of Holland. Maybe they never did justice, but the fact that very low barriers to entry means that you can have hundreds of millions of users because the costs are so low and the cost is all. So there is a kind of mix to this whole debate, and I think there's that in the global field, certainly television, private television, public television, and radio play a much bigger role as a source of information than social media, in part because social media is largely a phenomenon. In India, I used to have a set of slides which showed this. I think I showed them last year to Paris. That in the ABC cities in Delhi, Calcutta, Mumbai, and Bangalore, that you have a concentration of social media, but it diminishes as you move outside the countryside. So there are very large gaps in the case of India where you've got an urban phenomenon, but there's always the potential that the backward linkage extending into rural India may occur or have already occurred. We're having seen great demonstrations